You're watching VinylicPumaGaming. Hey guys, back with another Borderlands 2 countdown, and I figured that today we could go over some of the best guns, weapons, and gear for Gaige the Mechromancer. As we've done in previous episodes, and to keep things interesting, instead of picking the same best guns and weapons in the entire game, which consist of things like the norfleet, Grog Nozzle, Uncomb Herald, Pimpernel, and others, I figured we could go over weapons, items, and other gear that are really good or are best on Gaige. Otherwise, this list would basically be the double penetrating Uncomb Herald, the norfleet, Grog Nozzle, Pimpernel, and other top tier weapons. I'm also trying to include a variety of items here that encompass a wide variety of playstyles. That way, you don't just see a list of similar guns. But without further ado, these are going to be the top 10 best guns, weapons, and gear for Gaige the Mechromancer in Borderlands 2, starting now. Number 10. The Hive. Something that you may end up discovering is that homing projectile weapons tend to work moderately well if Gaige has a high anarchy stack count. You may find that previously maligned or awful weapons like homing spikers, the Seeker, and other similar weapons tend to work a little bit better since anarchy can significantly and quite easily boost their damage. However, I think the best homing weapon for Gaige is probably going to be the Hive rocket launcher, especially when it's combined with the Grog Nozzle's drunk effect. The nice thing about the Hive is that your accuracy doesn't really matter, and as long as you don't shoot the rocket into a wall and you either fire at the ground or at a ceiling, you're going to be getting all of the little needle projectiles to home in and hit targets. While I recommend that you pre-stack Anarchy before you use this thing in combat, 200 or more stacks of Anarchy will provide a significant enough damage bonus. And if you add in the Grog Nozzle's drunk effect, you're firing 5 orbs that spew homing projectiles that can deal significant amounts of damage to enemies. While I wouldn't make this your go-to rocket launcher, this is a great rocket launcher to keep in mind, especially if you don't have access to something like a norfleet, Topnia, or any other E-Tech launcher for that matter. To get the Hive, you will need to kill Saturn for one in the Arid Nexus Badlands. These launchers are fairly rare, so you may be at it for a while until you actually get one. Ironically, you may end up getting a legendary Invader Sniper Rifle first. Number 9. The Thunderball Fists. So the Thunderball Fists pistol is a pretty strange weapon. Like a normal Mal-1 pistol, it fires its initial projectile. However, upon hitting a target or a surface, it spawns this electrical orb that floats for a second or two and then explodes, dealing damage to enemies. I found this effect works best on the binary version, which allows you to simply fire 2 projectiles and you can create 2 orbs that eventually explode. This weapon tends to work best with heavy investment into the Little Big Trouble tree. If you can find a class mod that boosts Wires Don't Talk and a Shock Bone of the Ancients, you could significantly boost this weapon's damage potential. And you may also find this gun works moderately well with about 100 Anarchy stacks or so, which should up the damage quite a bit. My only complaint with this gun is that it's similar to the Kerblaster in the sense that the secondary projectile or orb takes too long to deal damage. Enemies can backpedal outside the orb's blast radius, which makes dealing the bulk of your damage a lot more difficult. That said, you can circle enemies as you fire, and this tends to make them less prone to backing up all the time. Now, if you want the Thunderball Fists pistol, you can either kill Captain Flint in the Southern Shelf, or you can kill Sparky Flint from the Son of Cromarex DLC. Keep in mind, this gun requires no DLC to acquire. Number 8. The Legendary Catalyst. So the Legendary Catalyst is the definitive Little Big Trouble class mod and is basically what you want if you plan on putting together a damage over time build for Gaige. This class mod is moderately powerful and provides a slightly more unique way to play Gaige as opposed to running around with rocket launchers and a sham all the time. This class mod provides a percentage boost to team elemental effect damage, and what this means is that it will improve the damage of certain status effects like burn, electrocute, or corrode. As for the skills that this class mod boosts, you're getting boosts to more pep, electrical burn, evil enchantress, and wires don't talk. More pep will increase the likelihood of applying status effects. Electrical burn will occasionally apply a fire damage over time effect on top of a shock damage over time effect. Evil Enchantress will improve damage over time slightly, and Wires Don't Talk boosts your overall shock damage. You also get a boost to Interspersed Outburst, which is an interesting skill which will give you a chance to slag an enemy, provided that you haven't shot at an enemy for a while. You will deal more slag damage the more points you have in the skill, and accruing 5 stacks will greatly improve your chances of slagging enemies. You may find this is more of a support class mod for multiplayer. You may use Gaige for slagging enemies and for applying other status effects so that your friends can more easily take enemies down. That said, you'll find that the Catalyst is quite effective in single player as well. And if you want this class mod, you will need the Digistruct Peak add-on, and you will also need to kill a tubby enemy at level 62 or higher for a chance to get one. Number 7, the Chain Lightning. Now, the Chain Lightning is a popular grenade mod for a variety of different characters and playstyles. Melee Zero players will occasionally use it to strip their hide of Terramorphous, or it can be used when wielding a grog nozzle to quickly recover the player's health. However, I think Gaige may make the best use of this grenade when combined with several skills from the Little Big Trouble tree. Wires Don't Talk will boost the shock damage, and other skills like Evil Enchantress, Electrical Burn, and More Pep increase the likelihood of causing status effects from the Chain Lightning. You might be surprised to hear this, but the combined shock and fire damage over time effects can deal a decent amount of damage to flesh vulnerable enemies. Perhaps not quite as much as damage over time Krieg, but you can deal a decent amount of damage this way. Ultimately, I think the Chain Lightning is a great grenade mod for Gaige, and like the other magic grenade mods, you will need the Dragon Keep DLC, and you'll need to kill a badass sorcerer in order to get this grenade to drop. In my opinion, with a good slag weapon and proper skill point investment, the Chain Lightning is actually pretty nice. Number 6, the legendary Anarchist class mod. As far as class mods for Gaige go, this is probably one of my favorites. While I wouldn't say it's the best class mod or anything, I think it's perfect for stacking Anarchy really quickly. I would attribute that to the fact that it boosts Typecast Iconoclast, which is a skill that can improve the rate at which you gain Anarchy stacks. And instead of just gaining 1 stack, you get a fairly high chance to gain 2. I also like the percentage boost to gun damage that's inherent with this class mod. 50% or so is fairly significant and should make your weapons much more effective. That said, the decrease to weapon accuracy can make operating some weapons a little bit more difficult, especially if you've acquired a lot of Anarchy stacks. When it comes to skill boosts, I really like the boosts to Myelin and Unstoppable Force, as they boost both shield capacity and movement speed respectively. The only skill I'm not particularly crazy about is Strength of 5 Gorillas, which simply improves melee damage for both you and Death Trap. I guess it works, but it's not something I would really rave about. While this class mod isn't going to make your DPS amazing, I've found it goes really well with the Topnia and an Absorption Shield. You should be able to quickly move around the map, firing at enemies, and whittle down their HP. And if you want a legendary Anarchist class mod, you will need the Digistruct Peak add-on. You'll also need to be level 62 or higher and kill a tubby enemy for your chance to get one. Number 5, the Conference Call. So the Conference Call is a really popular choice for a lot of Gaige users simply because it fires a ridiculous amount of projectiles that are compatible with both her Close Enough and her Nth Degree skills. In fact, firing this gun with both of these skills maxed out can be quite the spectacle to behold. And if you have really high Anarchy, several of these projectiles can veer towards enemies and deal a decent chunk of damage. As I'm sure many veteran players are aware, the Conference Call was one of the best guns in the game when it was originally combined with the B-Shield. However, the B-Shield got nerfed, and the Conference Call lost a lot of its insane damage output ability. That said, it's still a really good option up against larger enemies like Terramorphous or the Son of Cromarax. In fact, since the Son of Cromarax is vulnerable to shock damage, it might be a good idea to use a shock Conference Call against him. What you will also like about this gun is that it has a decent magazine size and fairly low ammo consumption per shot. Even with Anarchy, you will feel like you can fire for days, and from my experience, I've found that I've had the best luck with the Conference Call in indoor environments. Or if you are going to use this gun outdoors, try to use it near areas where there are a lot of walls. If you want the Conference Call, you will need to either kill the Warrior or kill the Handsome Sorcerer. The first boss doesn't require any DLC, but the Handsome Sorcerer requires that you have the Dragon Keep DLC. Number 4, the Necromancer. The general consensus seems to be that the Necromancer class mod, and more specifically, the Chaotic Good version, is going to be one of Gaige's best class mods for DPS. This is because the Chaotic Good version boosts both fire rate and reload speed, which will improve your DPS with most weapons. Ideally, you're also going to want a Necromancer class mod that is blue rarity that boosts Wires Don't Talk by +6. That way, you can get a maximum of 33% elemental damage bonus at 11 out of 5 points in the skill. And when combined with a high-quality Shock Bone of the Ancients, you should be able to easily accrue over 60% elemental damage bonus, which will greatly improve the damage of your shock weapons. Also keep in mind that this bonus isn't additive and is multiplicative. Otherwise, you can receive either a skill point boost to either Strength of the 5 Gorillas or Made of Sterner Stuff. Of the two, I tend to prefer the latter since I like to use the Blockade with this class mod, because the Blockade has inherent damage resistance and it sort of stacks. Obviously, you're going to want to use shock weapons here. Any good shock weapons or shock elemental versions of weapons you would like to use go great with this class mod. The damage boost that this class mod can provide should be pretty significant, and if you want one of these, you're going to have to get lucky as it can only be obtained from Dragon Keep loot chests from the Dragon Keep DLC. So you may have to do some farming. Number 3. The Twister. The Twister is a pretty good gun on several characters, however I think it's most commonly used in many Gaige builds. One of the reasons for this is fairly obvious, and that's because this is a shock shotgun. However, the second reason is a little less obvious, and that's because of the way the Twister's projectile pattern works. Even at relatively high anarchy stack counts, the Twister is a fairly reliable weapon, and it's very easy to maintain good accuracy. And like all other shock weapons, the Twister greatly benefits from Wires Don't Talk, which is basically an additional elemental bonus that goes on top of what your Shock Bone of the Ancients would be providing. Plus, since it's a Jacob shotgun, it has good synergy with Anarchy, and generally, weapons with low magazine size and relative fast reload are great for accumulating Anarchy faster. Otherwise, the Twister is pretty weird. Unlike most Jacob's weapons, it comes in an element and deals some splash damage too. And my first issue with this gun is the slow projectile speed. However, you could also argue that's its saving grace because it makes it really easy to boost its critical hit damage by swapping to a Lady Fist. And the other issue is acquiring a Twister. This is a DLC weapon, and it's part of the Sir Hammerlock's Big Game Hunt DLC. However, you have to spawn a mini-boss known as Omen Omedok, and he is the result of a badass savage evolution. Even if you do get him to spawn, there is no guarantee that the Twister will actually drop. But if you want an excellent gun for your Mechromancer, the Twister is really hard to beat. Number 2, the Fibber. The Fibber is a fairly complex weapon. Unlike many other weapons in Borderlands 2, there are actually 3 different versions that look almost identical. There is the Shotgun Fibber, which fires slow-moving projectiles like a shotgun. There's the Crit Fibber, which fires small ball-like projectiles that can deal massive amounts of critical hit damage. And there's the Ricochet Fibber, which fires projectiles that ricochet and end up producing more projectiles. Of the 3, the Ricochet Fibber is the one that you want for Gaige. If you're unsure which version you have, the Ricochet Fibber has moderately decent accuracy around the 60s or so, and has extremely high damage on the item card. Using this gun is a little unintuitive at first, and I'll admit that I am not the best with the Ricochet Fibber. The goal is to try to aim down in such a way that you can get the ricocheting projectiles to hit the enemy's crit spot. And this can take some practice, as you'll have to properly gauge the distancing and angle of your shots so that they veer up into an enemy's face. If you want this gun, you can receive it from Mal upon completion of the Real Boy questline in the Iridium Blight. Keep in mind that the Ricochet Fibber isn't guaranteed, and you may receive the other 2 versions, so it may take a while before you get the version that you want. And finally, number 1, the Bunny. Just kidding, the norfleet. Now, I know somebody probably groaned a little bit at this one. After all, the norfleet is pretty much the best rocket launcher in the entire game, and as long as you have a sham shield to absorb the rockets, you can basically steamroll every mob type enemy in this game. And if you're new to the Borderlands community, this technique is referred to as sham fleeting. Now, I am of the belief that Gaige is easily the best sham fleeter of all the Vault Hunters simply because of her anarchy skill. Because getting kills increases your damage output, and the norfleet kills most things in under 4 shots, it's extremely easy to gain anarchy stacks very quickly with this weapon. Of course, the more anarchy stacks you can gain, the more powerful the norfleet gets. Now, the norfleet pretty much destroys everything but raid bosses, and I would say the big reason for that is because the norfleet deals a lot of damage over a wide area, while weapons like the Interfacer or Unkempt Herald deal a lot of damage over a very confined space. Plus, the fire rate of the latter weapons is much higher. If you want this weapon, your best bet is going to be Vermivorous or Hyperius. And if you're playing single player, you will need to kill Hyperius, and that requires the Captain Scarlet DLC. However, to actually possess and use this gun, no DLC is required. Alright guys, that's going to pretty much wrap up this particular video. If you like this video, please be sure to leave a like, click the bell to join the notification squad, and as always, take care, and I'll see y'all next time.